I spent 3 years with Ethan, nominally his kept canary. He loved children and always hoped for one. I refused and lied, telling him I wanted to be child-free and didn't want to be tied down by kids. Later Ethan's company went bankrupt, and he fell from the clouds to the ground overnight, so despondent that he went to the rooftop to end it. I rushed over, holding a delicate little girl in my arms, and shoved her into his hands. "Don't be in such a hurry to die, you still have a daughter to raise." He stood frozen in place, dazed for a long moment, and asked in shock, "We've only been together for 3 years, how is this child already 4?" But seeing the little girl in his arms sobbing and hiccuping, he still hurriedly made his way down from the rooftop and awkwardly tried to soothe her. After that, he seemed like a different person. When he heard the child was being bullied at kindergarten, he would grab a stick and storm toward the school. When he learned she was infatuated with a delinquent boy, he was so worried he couldn't sleep for nights. That day I watched him busy in the kitchen and asked with a smile, "Still want to jump off the building now?" He was whipping cream for the cake at lightning speed, his hands moving so fast they left after images. Without looking up he said, "Nora said she wants cake tonight. Do you want mango or strawberry?" I was Ethan's canary for a full 3 years. To put it nicely, his girlfriend, bluntly, a bird he carefully kept in an expensive cage. He gave me an exquisitely luxurious life, and a tenderness and focus others could hardly match. But what he wanted most, I never gave him. He wanted a child carrying the blood of both of us. I always shook my head, brushing it off with light excuses. I said I was staunchly child-free. The thing I feared most in this life was the crying and trouble children bring. There was disappointment in his eyes, but he never forced me, only held me tighter and whispered that it was okay, that having him was enough. At that time, I thought life would always go on like that, inside the soft cage he had woven with money and affection, until the end of time. Until the Goo Corporation, that commercial empire, suddenly collapsed. In just 3 months the vast group fell apart, debts piling up like a mountain. Ethan fell from the clouds, losing everything, his business kingdom built with his own hands, and me, this canary who seemed to live only by clinging to him. I packed light, leaving behind every piece of jewelry he had ever given me. Before I left, I took one long, deep look at the duplex penthouse that had once stood for supreme glory and now lay only in a dead, echoing silence. I knew he was in there, perhaps standing at that enormous floor-to-ceiling window, watching the bustling world below that remained unchanged yet no longer belonged to him. I can more or less imagine what it feels like to be utterly broken and bereft of hope. So when I heard he had climbed up to the rooftop of the abandoned old tower of the Goo family building, I wasn't surprised in the least. That man was proud to his core, letting him linger in misery would be a fate worse than death. When I arrived, the wind on the rooftop was strong, whipping his thin shirt so it flapped, his silhouette so desolate it seemed it might be carried away at any moment. Below, a few scattered onlookers had gathered, along with media who had rushed over at the news, noisy and chaotic. Rescuers were trying to approach, but he stood at the very edge, refusing anyone to come near. "Ethan," I called, my voice not loud, but clear enough to cut through the wind and reach him. His back stiffened sharply, and he turned around extremely slowly. The eyes that had once been deep and sharp, always full of control and confidence, were now nothing but a withered, gray desolation, with a flicker of astonishment when he saw me. "Serena," he called my name, his voice hoarse and raw. "What are you doing here? To see me at my most pathetic?" A faint, self-mocking curve tugged at the corner of his mouth, tinged with the flavor of farewell. I was cradling a soft little bundle that slept sweetly. I stepped forward a few paces, ignoring his gesture telling me to look away, and walked straight up to him, only a few steps from that dangerous edge. The wind picked up. Without hesitation I shoved the sleeping bundle into his arms. The movement was almost rough. Ethan reflexively caught it, his arm going rigid, his whole body stunned. That soft, warm touch shocked him like an electric jolt, he barely dared to apply any force. "Don't be in such a hurry to die," I said, my tone as casual as if commenting on today's pleasant weather. "You still have a daughter." The child in my arms was roused by the movement, blinking groggily. Seeing the unfamiliar surroundings and the strange man holding her, her little mouth puckered, on the verge of crying. Ethan froze completely, his pupils contracting violently, as if he'd just heard the most absurd joke in the world. He lowered his head to look at the little face in his arms, jade white, adorable, with features that did indeed resemble his, and then suddenly looked up at me, his voice trembling. "Serena, what are you saying? We've only been together 3 years, tops. This child, judging by her size, she must be at least 3 or 4. You mean to tell me she's my daughter?" Logically it made no sense. Unless. Yeah, 4 years old. Her name is Nora. I dropped the second bomb in a flat tone. "Nora, call Daddy." The little lump ignored me completely. Ethan's stiff, awkward embrace made her extremely uncomfortable, and frightened by the unfamiliar surroundings she burst into loud wails, tears like strings of broken pearls, hot as they struck the back of Ethan's hand. The crying was piercing, instantly shattering the stagnant silence on the rooftop. It was like a heavy hammer, smashing hard into Ethan's heart. He was completely flustered. Those hands that once maneuvered deftly at negotiation tables and signed billion-dollar contracts with unshakable composure were now holding a small, sobbing child, trembling uncontrollably. He tried to comfort the child, awkward in posture, his voice hoarse. Don't cry, it's okay, don't be afraid." The child cried even harder, her little face flushed deep red as she squirmed in his arms. "If you hold her like that, she'll be uncomfortable." I couldn't stand it and spoke up to guide him. "Support her head, neck, and back with one hand, and hold her bottom with the other. Yes, just like that, let her rest against your chest." Ethan almost fumbled as he adjusted his posture according to my instructions, sweat even broke out at his temples. All his attention was occupied by the little thing wailing in his arms. There was no room left for thoughts of jumping off a building, bankruptcy, or utter despair. Right now his whole heart and eyes were focused on how to stop this little tyrant from crying. He awkwardly rocked her gently, making tuneless soothing sounds with his mouth, though they did nothing at all. The rescuers picked their moment and slowly closed in. But Ethan seemed not to see them at all, his entire focus was on the child. Cradling her, he instinctively, step by step, moved away from that dangerous edge. Safe. I breathed a little easier. Watching him, an always arrogant man, become flustered, dripping sweat, yet so careful and reverent with a tiny infant, made some soft place inside me completely melt. He held the baby as the rescuers escorted him down from the rooftop. As he passed by me, he suddenly stopped. His gaze on me was unbearably complex, his lips moved as if 1,000 questions waited to be asked, but in the end he only whispered hoarsely, why was she crying so hard? Is she uncomfortable somewhere?" I followed them downstairs. Ethan was escorted into a car. The child was still hiccuping and sobbing, but the cries had softened, probably from exhaustion. He kept that awkward yet as gentle as possible posture, frozen in place, as if cradling the most fragile treasure in the world. I opened the car door and got in. In the cramped space, the atmosphere felt a bit stagnant. Only Nora's occasional sobs broke the silence. Ethan's gaze stayed fixed on the child's face. The gray of his expression had faded, replaced by an intense shock, bewilderment, and a nascent, tentative curiosity and tenderness. He looked for a long time before slowly lifting his head, his gaze sharp and fixed on me as if trying to find traces of a lie on my face. "Serena, what is going on? I need an explanation." His voice was low, hoarse with the aftershocks of survival and laced with unquestionable seriousness. "The timing doesn't add up, you told me you were Dink." "I lied to you." I cut him off, answering crisply. "I'm not Dink. I just didn't want to bring a child into the world while you were keeping me like a canary in a cage, only to have my child become a bird in a cage too." His pupils tightened, as if my words had pricked him. As for the timing, I paused and met his gaze. I was already pregnant before we got together. It was a one-night stand, I don't even know who he was. By the time I found out, it was too late to do anything. Then I met you. You were so good to me, so good that it scared me. I was afraid you'd find out and leave me, or despise her. My lie was smoothly woven, half truth and half falsehood, my tone edged with just the right measure of vulnerability and guilt. Ethan was silent, his expression flickering as his gaze traveled repeatedly between me and the child's face. He seemed to be weighing the truth of my words. Nora, sensing the tension in the air, began to whimper again. Ethan immediately bent over and gently patted her back, still clumsy in the movement, but undeniably full of pity. "Her name is Nora?" he asked softly, his voice unusually gentle. Nora." I nodded. "I gave her the surname." He suddenly looked up at me, a flash of incredulous light passing through his eyes. It seemed to delight him greatly and also shook his belief that the child wasn't his. He looked down at the baby again, his gaze so tender it could have been liquid, murmuring softly, "Nora. Daddy is here." He hardly struggled at all, he simply accepted this daughter who had appeared out of nowhere. The bonds of blood are sometimes inexplicably powerful. Especially for him now, who had nothing and was on the brink of despair, this child was undoubtedly a light that had suddenly appeared at the end of the darkness. Ethan temporarily no longer had thoughts of ending his life. But he had nothing, he didn't even have a place to live. I brought him and Nora back to my small apartment. It was not large, 2 bedrooms and a living room, arranged warmly and comfortably, full of signs of everyday life, completely different from his previous cold-toned luxury loft. He held the child, standing in the doorway, looking a little awkward. "From now on, you can live here." I stepped aside to let him in. "You need somewhere to land, and Nora needs you." That last sentence hit him precisely. His entire reason to keep living now seemed to be this daughter. He entered silently, holding the child, surveying the small space. Nora, in the new surroundings, blinked her big curious eyes and looked around. She had stopped crying. I prepared the spare bedroom, changing the sheets and duvet cover. "You can sleep here for now. Nora usually sleeps with me, if you don't mind, tonight she could." "I'll take her." Ethan cut in immediately, his tone edged with an urgent insistence. After speaking he seemed to think he'd sounded too abrupt, so he softened his voice and added, "Is that okay? I want to spend more time with her." I glanced at him and nodded. "Up to you. But she might wake up at night and need a feed. Do you know how to make formula?" Ethan. Clearly he didn't. He used to be a CEO, those petty tasks were naturally handled by nannies and servants. Now he was just a brand new dad. "I'll teach you." I turned to the kitchen, took out the formula and a bottle. "The water should be around 45 degrees, put the water in first then the formula, level scoop, not more, not less, when you shake it don't shake too hard." As I spoke I demonstrated. He watched with intense seriousness, his gaze so focused it was as if he were handling a billion-dollar merger. When I finished and handed it to him, he took it, carefully tested the temperature, and only then brought it to Nora's mouth. The little girl was starving, drinking down eagerly with every sip. Ethan watched her swallow, and the corners of his mouth unconsciously lifted into the smallest of smiles. It was the first time since his bankruptcy that I saw something like the emotion of being alive on his face. At night, I heard movement from the second bedroom from time to time. The child fussed, and the man immediately got up, flustered, hurriedly preparing formula, clumsily burping the baby, softly humming an off-key lullaby. They were up several times through the night. The next morning, I opened the door to the second bedroom and saw Ethan holding the child, lying on his side in bed. Both of them were sleeping soundly. There were obvious dark circles under his eyes, and stubble had begun to show on his chin, making him look slightly haggard and downcast. But his arms held the child securely in his embrace, in a thoroughly protective posture. Sunlight slipped through the gap in the curtains and fell across those 2 similar faces, one big and one small. The scene felt inexplicably warm. I closed the door gently, not waking them. Sometimes the reason to keep living doesn't need to be grand, one soft, squishy little life that needs you is enough. Ethan adapted to the role of stay-at-home dad astonishingly fast. Perhaps it was because, aside from taking care of his daughter, he had nothing else to do at the moment. He set aside all his former airs and pride and devoted himself wholeheartedly to learning how to care for a child, how to prepare the formula, how to change a diaper, how to burp her, how to bathe and dress the baby. He even bought several parenting encyclopedias, wearing gold-rimmed glasses, the only thing from his past he kept, reading with extreme seriousness and occasionally taking notes. That meticulous look made me almost feel as if he were reading not how to deal with infant colic but some profound, unfathomable business document. Nora also seemed unusually clingy to this suddenly present father. When I used to take care of her, she was well behaved, but nowhere near as fussy as she is in front of Ethan. When Ethan held her in his arms, she always smiled especially sweetly, cooing and babbling in a way I couldn't understand, and liking to grab at his hair and stubble with her little hands. Ethan was always extremely patient, letting her fuss while a tenderness that could drown a person lived in his eyes. He read storybooks to her in a low, pleasant voice, even when the tales were childish, he spoke as if delivering an important report. He picked out little dresses for her with a man's atrocious sense of style. If it wasn't pink it was red, and insisted on putting a bunch of lace-trimmed little hair clips on Nora, dressing the little girl up like a walking Christmas tree. I couldn't help but complain, but he was adamant, frowning seriously as he said, "Girls should dress pretty." Then he held his pretty daughter in his arms, his face completely satisfied. The shadow cast by bankruptcy seemed to be gradually lifted by this little life. He began going out, no longer shut up in the apartment all day. He went to find work. The former CEO, now humbled, took a job as a junior project manager at a small company. The work was busy and the pay not high, but he threw himself into it with utmost seriousness. Every day after work, no matter how tired he was, the first thing he did was wash his hands and pick up our daughter, tickling her little face with his beard and listening to her giggles, as if that sound could wash away all his fatigue. Our lives seemed to have swapped places. He used to support me, now it was I who took him in, and he worked hard to provide for me and our daughter. This relationship was delicate, but no one dared to pry it open. The days seemed to pass peacefully like that, until Nora started kindergarten. Nora inherited Ethan's good looks and, perhaps some trait of mine? In any case she was very popular in kindergarten, but also prone to getting into trouble. One afternoon I went to pick her up from school. The teacher told me tactfully that Nora had a conflict with a little boy in the class, had been shoved, fallen, and scraped her knee a bit. When she saw me, the little girl, who was already fine, pouted in grievance and stuck out her short legs to show me the cartoon bandage on her knee. "Mommy, it hurts." I hugged her with a heartache and murmured a few soothing words. When we got home, Ethan had just come back from work. As soon as he walked in, he keenly sensed our daughter's low spirits. He set down his briefcase, came over and crouched, and asked softly, "What's wrong with Nora? Who made my little princess upset?" Seeing her father, Nora's grievance welled up again. Pointing to her knee she said, "Daddy, it hurts. Leo pushed me." Ethan's face went dark in an instant. He gingerly peeled back the bandage and, seeing the small scabbed wound, his eyes turned ice-cold. He said nothing, only carefully disinfected the cut, reapplied the bandage, then kissed his daughter's forehead. "Be good, Nora. Daddy's here, it won't hurt anymore." Having comforted his daughter, he played blocks with her for a while until she cheered up. Then he stood up and said to me, "I'm going out for a bit." His tone was calm, but I could hear the rumble of a storm about to break. "Where are you going?" I asked instinctively. "To buy a pack of cigarettes." He answered casually and turned to leave. But I distinctly remembered he had already quit smoking, because Nora couldn't stand the smell of smoke. A chill went through me, I had a bad feeling. I put Nora to sleep and sat in the living room, feeling unsettled. The clock on the wall ticked away, and after nearly an hour, Ethan still hadn't returned. I was hesitating whether to call him when the door opened. He came in, carrying a trace of summer night warmth, his expression as usual, even the corners of his mouth curved with a faint, almost imperceptible ease. "Not asleep yet?" He looked at me, his voice gentle. "Where did you go?" I stared at him and asked. "I told you, to buy cigarettes." He took off his coat and hung it up, movements natural and fluid. You quit smoking. I stated the fact. He paused, then came over and sat beside me, sighed, knowing he couldn't hide it from me. I went to Leo's home. My heart tightened. You went to see his parents? Nothing happened, right? What could happen? He smiled, reached out to ruffle my hair, the gesture intimate and natural, as if returning to the old days. We just had a friendly chat about parenting. I looked at him suspiciously. His eyes flickered for a moment, then he cleared his throat and added, and, by the way, had a deep discussion with his father about how kids should get along, and what price one pays for bullying someone else's daughter. I was left speechless. I could picture exactly what his so-called friendly exchange and deep discussion would look like. Although he had toned down his edge now, that oppressiveness and harshness of someone used to being above others, once unleashed, was not something an ordinary family could withstand. You didn't hit him, did you? I asked, a little worried. No, he chuckled. Am I that violent? I was just being reasonable. He paused, a cold gleam flashing in his eyes. But if his family's reason doesn't hold up, I don't mind trying another approach. He spoke casually, but I heard the weight behind his words. Clearly, the other child's parents had been convinced by his reasoning. The next day when I went to pick up Nora, the little boy named Leo ran over on his own, gave Nora his favorite toy car, and shyly said, "I'm sorry." Leo's mother came over too, her manner so polite it was almost tentative, repeatedly assuring me she would properly discipline her child. I watched the scene, half laughing and half crying. Ethan, even if he were bankrupt, at heart he'd still be that possessive, domineering man who always defends his own. He used to be domineering in business, now, all that forcefulness was directed at protecting his daughter. That night I told him the story as a joke. He was holding Nora and reading her a picture book. When he heard it, he only lifted an eyebrow and said matter-of-factly, "My daughter Ethan's, of course I can't let anyone bully her." Nora looked up and asked in a baby voice, "Daddy, what does bully mean?" Ethan bent down and, in the gentlest voice, said the hardest thing, someone who makes you unhappy. If anyone makes you unhappy from now on, tell Daddy, and Daddy will go make them happy. Me. This method of education seems somehow wrong? Nora grew safely to the age of 5, mischievous and spirited, a little spoiled by Ethan's doting but essentially kind and lovable. Ethan's career gradually improved, he was exceptionally capable, and even starting from the bottom he was quickly put to good use, promoted, and given a raise. Our life slowly became more comfortable, yet he still lived in my small apartment and never suggested moving out. Between us remained a subtle, tacit understanding. They were like family, yet there was an indescribable, unspoken hint of intimacy beyond that. He never mentioned the day she tried to jump again, nor did he press for details about Nora's background. He threw himself wholeheartedly into the role of father, and took pleasure in it. Until one day, Nora came home from kindergarten, her cheeks flushed, eyes sparkling with excitement. She threw herself into Ethan's arms and chattered, "Daddy, Daddy." A new intern teacher joined our class, "He's so handsome. His hair is curly and yellow, like a prince from a cartoon. He can even play the guitar." The little girl's vocabulary was limited, and her description tumbled out in halting pieces, but the admiration and affection nearly spilled over. Ethan's smile froze instantly. "Yellow hair," he repeated slowly, his voice a little tight. "Yes. Like corn. So pretty." Nora nodded vigorously, completely unaware of the sudden change in her father's expression. "He also said my eyes are pretty, like stars." Ethan tightened his hold on his daughter's arm and looked at me sharply, silently mouthing, "Yellow hair?" I couldn't help but smile and nodded. It seemed that in any era, little girls in kindergarten have about the same resistance to yellow hair. Ethan's face had completely darkened. That night he didn't sleep at all. Tossing and turning, sighing. Sometimes he sat up, sometimes he lay back down. I slept in the master bedroom next door and could hear the commotion coming from his side. The next morning I found him at the breakfast table with a pair of huge dark circles under his eyes, a cold cup of coffee before him, his gaze vacant, his expression so grave he looked like he was contemplating the company's bankruptcy. Nora was still excitedly chattering about her blonde prince teacher. The spoon in Ethan's hand clattered onto the table. He sprang to his feet, grabbed my wrist, pulled me into the kitchen, shut the door, cutting off our daughter's voice. He lowered his voice. There was a panic and seriousness I had never heard from him before. "Serena, what do we do? Nora seems to be having a crush? Or maybe she's taken a liking to that blonde kid?" He looked less like he was talking about a 5-year-old and more like he was talking about a 15-year-old sinking into adolescent rebellion. I couldn't help it, I burst out laughing. "She's only 5, Ethan." I laughed until my sides hurt. "She doesn't even know what like means. She probably just thinks the new teacher is good-looking and admires him a bit." "You're overreacting. 5 is not little anymore." Ethan's brow furrowed, as if facing a grave enemy. "Kids these days mature early. And it's a blonde." "A blonde? Do you know what that means? Rebellious. Unreliable. Irresponsible. He might even play the guitar to trick little girls." He clearly held an extremely ingrained stereotype and an inexplicable fear of blondes. "Maybe the teacher is just a sunny, cheerful big kid?" I tried to soothe his overly tense nerves. "No way." Ethan snapped, beginning to pace anxiously in the kitchen. "I have to go see for myself. I need to check him out personally. What if he has designs on my daughter?" I stared up at the sky in silence. What could a 5-year-old girl possibly be scheming? Wanting her milk served in a sippy cup? Wanting a teddy to be hugged to sleep? But Ethan had clearly sunk into that peculiar paranoid streak some old fathers get. He really had taken half a day off to go do a field inspection at the kindergarten. When he came back, he looked even worse. I asked, "Well? Did you see that blonde teacher?" Ethan nodded heavily, forcing the words out between his teeth. "I saw him. He really is blonde." Smiling all bright, grinning at everyone, looked unreliable at a glance. He even hugged Nora. Though it was just a polite little hug. He spoke through gritted teeth. I could almost picture the scene, a sunny, handsome intern teacher warmly hugging a cute little child, while the child's father stood by glaring at him as if he wanted to kill. "And then? You just stood there and watched?" I asked, curious. "I went to see the director," Ethan said expressionlessly. Under the pretense of caring about children's mental health, I tactfully inquired whether the school conducts rigorous background checks and psychological evaluations on newly hired staff, especially intern teachers. Me. Poor guy, he managed to make picking a fight sound so high-minded. "What did the director say?" "The principal said their vetting was very strict, that teacher is excellent in every way." Ethan's tone sounded regretful, then he became alert. "But you can't judge a book by its cover. I have to stay vigilant." From then on, Ethan began his routine of guarding against the blonde. He insisted on personally dropping off and picking up Nora every day, all to observe that blonde teacher up close. From time to time he would probe subtly, asking his daughter if the blonde teacher had said anything strange today or done anything odd. She even started feeding Nora ideas like "Daddy is the man who loves you the most in the world and men outside are all dangerous." Nora was annoyed by the questions, her temper flared. Pouting, she said, "Daddy, you're so naggy. I'm not talking to you anymore. I like Teacher Huang the best." Ethan felt as if struck by lightning and couldn't sleep that night either. I watched him with that worried, as if afraid someone would steal his little cabbage look. While I felt some sympathy for the poor blonde-haired teacher, I was mostly amused and, a little sweetly helpless. This man truly adored his daughter. Days flowed on amid Ethan's constant anxiety and Nora's carefree joy. Ethan's career grew ever more successful, he seemed born for this line of work, and even if he had to start over from scratch, he could climb back up step by step. He became busier than before, but no matter how busy, he would leave work on time to have dinner with his daughter, read her stories, and lull her to sleep. He never spoke of the past again, nor of the future. We were like a family of three, yet separated by a subtle sheet of tissue paper thin glass. I knew that Nora's origins would always be a knot in his heart. A knot he dared not touch lightly, afraid that once pricked, all the warmth before him would vanish. Until one day, Nora fell ill. Children's illnesses come on fast and fierce. In the middle of the night she suddenly developed a high fever, her little face burning bright red, mumbling deliriously. Ethan and I were both terrified. He immediately scooped her up, I wrapped her in a blanket, and the two of us rushed to the hospital through the night. The emergency room was crowded, and the wait felt unbearably agonizing. Ethan held Nora the whole time, constantly pressing his forehead to hers to check her temperature, his face paler even than sick Nora's. He kept murmuring soothingly, "Nora, be good, Daddy's here, don't be afraid, it will stop hurting soon." The pain and fear in his voice were so thick they seemed to dissolve. After checking, the doctor said it was a fever caused by a viral cold and she needed N4. When the nurse came to insert the needle, Nora screamed as if her heart would break, struggling violently. Ethan held her tightly, his eyes rimmed red, begging the nurse to be gentler, just a little gentler. In that moment, there wasn't a trace left of the composed, self-possessed CEO he used to be. After finally getting the 4 in, Nora fell asleep from crying, sniffling in his arms. Ethan stayed exactly like that, holding her motionless, sitting in the hospital infusion room, staring without blinking at his daughter's sleeping face as if a single blink would make her disappear. I watched the tension in his profile and said softly, "Go sit over there for a bit, I'll hold her for a while." He shook his head, his voice hoarse, "No, I'm not tired." After a beat, he suddenly spoke in an extremely low voice, like talking to himself and yet as if to me, "I can't lose her. Serena. I really can't." At that moment he was as fragile as a child. My heart tightened slightly, I reached out and gently covered his cold knuckles with my hand. He turned his hand and clenched mine tightly, with a grip strong enough to almost hurt me. But neither of us let go. In the cold hospital infusion room, we leaned against each other, together guarding our sick little baby. The air smelled of disinfectant, yet it flowed with a warmth and dependency called home. Nora recovered and was soon back to her lively, bouncing self. But after this, Ethan seemed even more anxious about her, nearly to the point of seeing danger in every rustle. At the same time, his attitude toward me underwent some subtle changes. The curiosity and hesitation in his eyes deepened. Sometimes when he looked at me, he would start to speak and then stop. I knew that the vulnerability and dependence that night in the hospital had loosened some of the walls in his heart. Perhaps he wanted a definite answer now. An answer about Nora, about me, about the relationship between us. But he was still afraid. That weekend, we took Nora to the park to play. The little girl chased Bubbles across the grass, her laughter clear and bright like silver bells. Ethan stood beside me, his gaze never leaving our daughter, then suddenly asked softly, "What was she like when she was little?" I paused for a moment before realizing he meant Nora as a baby. "Very good, she didn't cry much, eat, sleep, eat," I recalled, a smile unconsciously curling my lips. "She was just a bit clingy, she had to be held to sleep, and the moment you put her down she'd wake up." Ethan listened, a deep regret and longing showing in his eyes. "Back then, you were alone. It must have been hard, right?" He looked at me, his gaze full of apology and concern. I shook my head. "It's all past. Seeing her so adorable, no hardship was for nothing." He was silent for a long time, long enough that Nora ran back and threw herself into his arms, clamoring for water. He carefully took out a water bottle and fed her, but his gaze kept drifting, as if he were making some weighty decision. That night, after I'd put Nora to sleep and finished my shower, I came out to find Ethan standing at my bedroom door, as if he'd been waiting a while. He wore loungewear, his hair was slightly damp, the daytime air of professionalism softened, replaced by a domestic gentleness. "Something wrong?" I wiped my hair and asked. He took a deep breath, as if making a great decision, his gaze burning as he looked at me. Serena, we need to talk. His expression was serious and solemn in a way I'd never seen before. My heart skipped a beat. What had to happen was happening. I led him into the bedroom. The room was small, with only a bed and a dressing table. The two of us stood inside, the distance between us suddenly narrowed, and the air seemed to grow thin. He was clearly nervous, his Adam's apple bobbed. What do you want to talk about? I asked, feigning calm. About Nora, about you, about us. He looked straight into my eyes, no longer avoiding them. I know I may not have the right to ask. For the past 3 years I've been running away from this question. I was afraid the answer wouldn't be what I wanted. I was afraid of breaking the life we have now. His voice was low and clear. But Serena, I've become more and more greedy. I don't just want to be Nora's father, I also want to, legitimately be your husband. My heart skipped a beat, and I tightened my grip on the towel. Nora's background, he said with difficulty, each word seeming weighed for a long time. You told me it was a one-night stand. Is that true? The bedroom was so quiet we could hear each other's breathing. I watched the tension, the hope, and the hidden pain in his eyes. I knew that if I nodded, he would believe me, bury that regret and hurt in his heart, and go on playing the role of father and, perhaps, become my husband. He loved me, and he loved Nora, loved enough not to fuss over what he thought was the past. But I looked at him and slowly shook my head. Ethan's pupils suddenly contracted, his face paling by a third in an instant. The hand on the doorknob tightened sharply, knuckles turning white. He looked as if he'd been sentenced to death, the light in his eyes flickered out bit by bit, his voice horribly dry. So, even that, was lying to me? You actually love someone? He just left? Or his imagination was clearly racing toward something worse. The expression on his face was pitiful and almost laughable. I sighed and finally stopped teasing him. Ethan, you idiot. I looked at him and spoke each word clearly. Nora is your daughter. Your biological daughter. From beginning to end, it's only you. Ethan froze completely. It was as if struck by a bolt of lightning, from head to toe, every cell in his body solidified. He widened his eyes and stared at me intently, as if he hadn't understood my words, and as if he'd just heard the most incredible tale from 1001 Nights. What did you say? His voice drifted like a wisp of smoke, trembling with disbelief. Say it again? I said, Nora, you are Ethan's biological daughter. I repeated patiently, my tone certain. There was no one-night stand, there was no one else. Only you. He gasped sharply, stumbled back a step, and leaned against the door with a soft thud. His expression shifted unpredictably, shock, ecstasy, bewilderment, confusion, remorse. Countless emotions churned and tangled in his eyes. But, time, 3 years, 4 years old, he spoke incoherently, his logic completely unraveled. I was already pregnant before we got together. I explained softly. Do you remember that summer 4 years ago, that night at the Lost Trail Hotel? Ethan's pupils trembled again. Of course he remembered. It had been the celebration after Goo Group landed a major contract. He drank too much, his consciousness hazy, remembering only a girl with clear eyes and the faint scent of gardenias. The next morning she was gone, leaving only a pale red mark on the sheet and an unremarkable earring. He had looked for her, but the hotel footage was blurry and the crowd was a sea of faces. In the end it came to nothing. He had never imagined that the accident that night would leave behind such a precious gift. Nor had he imagined that the girl would turn out to be Serena, the same one who later appeared by his side and whom he kept close for 3 years. It's you, it's really you, he murmured, as if finally unraveling a long-standing mystery, a dazzling light bursting in his eyes. But almost immediately that light was smothered by a heavy wash of guilt and aching care. He took a sudden step forward, grabbed my shoulder with a little too much force, his voice urgent and hoarse. So you knew all along. You knew when you came to me. Then why didn't you tell me? You watched me want a child, watched me say you were Dink, watched you carry and give birth to a child alone, suffer so much, why didn't you tell me? The rims of his eyes were red, moisture glinting there. It was pain, regret, and fear. I looked at him in his agitation, my chest aching with a sour, stinging warmth. At first I was afraid, I answered honestly. I'm just an ordinary girl with nothing, and you're a lofty CEO. If I went to you with the child, what would that look like? Blackmail? Clinging on? I didn't want that. Later, you treated me so well that I grew more and more addicted, and more afraid. I was afraid that if you learned the truth, you would think I was calculating, that I had ulterior motives, afraid you would doubt whether Nora was truly your biological child, afraid that all the beauty we had would be shattered. After that, you went bankrupt. I paused, my voice dropping. Telling you at that time would have felt more like coercion and a burden. I didn't want that. Ethan listened, his arms tightening suddenly, and he pulled me into his chest with a fierce grip. The force was almost as if he wanted to knead me into his very bones. His body trembled slightly. I'm sorry. Serena. I'm sorry, he whispered over and over in my ear, his voice choked, it's my fault. I left you to bear so much alone. I was stupid, I didn't recognize you. I didn't notice sooner. Scalding liquid dripped onto the hollow of my neck, burning my skin. He cried. That proud man, who didn't cry when he went bankrupt, who didn't cry when he jumped off the building, was now crying like a child because he was worried about me and our daughter. I wrapped my arms around him and gently patted his back. It's all past. Isn't things better now? Nora has you, and I have you. He held me for a long time before slowly calming down. Let go of me. He cupped my face, forehead pressing against mine, his gaze sinking deep into my eyes, his tone more solemn and resolute than I'd ever heard. Serena, marry me. It wasn't a question, it was an earnest decision. Give me a chance to make up for the absence of the past. Let me, with full right, take care of you and love you. The three of us, always together. No flowers, no ring, not even the right setting. Yet in that moment it was more moving than any meticulously planned proposal. I looked at him, at the rims of his eyes still red, at the love and guilt so thick inside them it couldn't dissolve, and I gently nodded, okay. A tidal joy instantly overwhelmed him. He bent down suddenly and kissed my lips. It wasn't the kind of kiss that had once carried a sense of possession, but one full of the treasured return of something lost, of tenderness and surging emotion. This kiss had been delayed by more than 4 years. But thankfully, it was not too late. After the proposal, Ethan seemed like a different person. Specifically, the way he looked at Nora, beyond his old indulgence, held a new, indescribable excitement and an almost reverent gratitude. As if his daughter were some rare treasure regained after being lost. He became even more clingy with me, as if wanting to spend all 24 hours of the day with me and our daughter. Where he used to come home from work and first pick up the baby, now he would pick me up first, then the baby. Nora protested vehemently, hands on her hips and puffing, "Daddy bad. Pick up mommy first. Nora is jealous." Ethan would laugh heartily and gather the two of us into his arms, kissing one cheek and then the other. "You're both daddy's treasures." The atmosphere at home was sickeningly sweet. He began actively preparing for the wedding. Nothing was too small, he handled every detail personally. From the style of the wedding dress to the brand of candy favors, he weighed each choice one by one. He even took time to have the rings remade. "The ones I gave you before don't suit the you are now," he said, taking my hand, his tone earnest. "I want to give you the best, something unique." I teased him, "Ethan CEO, you're not the same CEO you used to be, tone it down." He arched an eyebrow, and that familiar confidence and sharpness rekindled in his eyes. "Don't worry, I'll still make enough to support a wife and kids. And soon, I won't be just a CEO anymore." His words were laden with meaning. I didn't pay much attention, assuming it was just a new upturn in his career. Until one day, I saw news about him on the financial channels. Not about the small company he was currently working for, but about the Gu family conglomerate. The report said that after bankruptcy and restructuring, the GU Group had been acquired by a mysterious capital party, injected with substantial funds, introduced to a new management model, revived from the brink, and had achieved a staggering valuation in the latest round of financing. And the representative of that mysterious capital group was named Ethan. I froze, staring at the name again and again. That night, when he got home, I held up my phone and asked him, "What's going on here?" He glanced at it and smiled with casual ease, as if it were nothing worth mentioning. "Oh, it's nothing. Just taking back something that belonged to me." He spoke lightly, but I knew that behind it there must have been a heart-stopping battle of capital and extraordinary, arduous effort. He had never truly given up in those 3 years. While starting from the bottom to gain experience and connections, he was secretly planning and waiting for the right moment to strike back. Now he had succeeded. The man who once fell into the dust had, through astonishing persistence and ability, climbed back to the top. He was even steadier and stronger than before. Ethan returned to steer the GU family and was busier than ever. But he declined all unnecessary social engagements and kept as much time as possible for the family. He insisted we still live in my small apartment, saying it felt more like home. Nora seemed to vaguely sense that Dad had become more formidable, but she had no real idea how much stronger he was. She still acted spoiled and petulant, straddling his neck and bossing him around. Ethan remained perfectly content with this. Wedding preparations were in full swing. Ethan insisted on giving me an extraordinarily lavish wedding to make up for all the regrets. I couldn't argue with him, so I went along. On the day I tried on wedding dresses, he had purposely cleared an entire day to be with me. When I stepped out of the fitting room in the custom main gown, he was completely stunned. His eyes stared at me without blinking, his breathing seeming to halt. After a long moment, he finally walked over step by step and stopped in front of me. His voice was harshly hoarse. "Serena, you're so beautiful." His eyes were a little red again. I knew he was thinking about all the time lost. I smiled and hugged him first. "From now on you'll see me every day, for the rest of your life, until you get tired of me." He held me tightly, chin resting on the crown of my head. "I could never get enough of you in a lifetime." Nora, wearing a little flower girl's dress, hopped around beside us. "Mama is the princess. Papa is the prince. Nora is the little princess." Ethan bent down and scooped her up too. The three of us hugged each other tightly, reflected in the huge fitting room mirror, a scene so perfectly complete it felt unreal. On the eve of the wedding, Ethan was inexplicably anxious. He stayed up late, pulling me through every detail, repeatedly checking where the rings were, whether my heels would rub, and if it might rain tomorrow. I laughed helplessly. "CEO, I've never seen you this nervous even when negotiating deals worth tens of billions." He sighed, pulled me into his arms, his voice carrying a faint, barely noticeable grievance. "You can lose a business and negotiate again. Marrying you happens only once, there can be no mistakes." My heart melted into a puddle. I kissed his chin of my own accord. "Don't worry, you won't get away. Just be there on time tomorrow." Only then did he relax a little, but he still held me and wouldn't sleep. In the dark he murmured, "Serena, thank you." "Thank me for what?" "Thank you for bringing Nora into this world, thank you for coming to my side at that time, thank you for still loving me and marrying me." His voice was low and sincere. "You gave me the whole world." I nuzzled into his chest, listening to his steady heartbeat, feeling that this life was complete and I wanted nothing more. "Thank you too, Ethan, for not really jumping. Otherwise, none of this would have happened." He laughed softly and kissed the top of my head. That was the best decision I ever made in my life." The wedding was grand and romantic. Ethan had practically brought all the flowers in the city. Before everyone's eyes, he slipped the ring onto my finger and solemnly vowed a lifetime of commitment. Nora, as the little flower girl, scattered petals with more gusto than anyone and smiled more happily than anyone. During the toasts, Ethan's business friends teased him one after another. "Mr. Ethan, you hid them well. Such a beautiful wife and such an adorable daughter, and only now you bring them out." No wonder he bounced back so quickly after going bankrupt back then. Turns out he had a loving wife and daughter waiting to support him. Now he's a winner in life. Success in both career and family. Ethan kept a grin plastered on his face the whole time, taking everyone's toasts, clearly in an explosively good mood. He put his arm around my waist and made no attempt to hide his happiness and contentment from the crowd. Yeah, my greatest achievement isn't the Goo Corporation, it's them. He lowered his head to look at me, his gaze so tender it could drown someone. I pushed him lightly, my cheeks warm, but he only laughed louder. That night, after the guests had left, Nora had long since fallen asleep from exhaustion and had been taken home by the nanny. Ethan had also had a bit too much to drink, his eyes glassy. He clung to me and wouldn't let go, calling me wife over and over. Back in the marital home we had redecorated together, he had ultimately persuaded me to move into the apartment he repurchased and had decorated to my tastes. He pinned me against the door and kissed me with urgent, passionate intensity. The air heated up in an instant. In the midst of the dizzying desire, he suddenly stopped, pressed his forehead to mine, panting, and asked very seriously, "Serena, shall we give Nora a little brother or sister?" I was taken aback by the unexpected question, then let out a laugh. "Ethan, your daughter is almost 5, you're only thinking about a second child now? Besides, isn't a daughter enough for you?" He rubbed against the tip of my nose, his tone a little coquettish and expectant. "It's different. I missed so much of Nora growing up. I want to be there from start to finish, fully involved. Watching your belly grow day by day, feeling the baby move, being there for the birth, feeding her first mouthful of milk, changing her first diaper." As he spoke, his eyes were full of longing and regret. "I want to make up for all the missed moments. Serena, will you let me?" His gaze was burning, laced with the smell of wine and love, almost melting me. I couldn't bring myself to refuse. I clung to his shoulder and gave a small, gentle nod. He was ecstatic, scooped me up and headed for the bedroom. One moment of spring night is worth 1,000 gold pieces. Clearly he had no intention of wasting a single second. Married life was sweet to the point of cloying. Ethan had completely turned into a husband and daughter servant. He came home from work on time every day for dinner, and weekends were strictly family days, without exception. He took on most of the housework, especially the cooking. He said I had worked hard taking care of Nora before, now it was his turn. His culinary skills improved at lightning speed, everything from Chinese dishes to Western pastries. There was nothing he couldn't make. Nora was fed by him until her little face was round and chubby, becoming pickier and only accepting the food her dad made. I protested, "If this keeps up, Nora and I will both be fattened into pigs by you." He smiled and leaned in to kiss me. "Get a little chubbier, it's nicer to hold." Then he doubled down on experimenting with new recipes. He even put plans for a second child on the agenda and worked extremely hard. But it seemed a bit too hard. One morning I woke up with a sore back and complained, and he cheerfully brought breakfast, face full of satisfaction. "Come on, honey, let's aim to make Nora a big sister next year." I grabbed a pillow and hit him. Nora seemed to have noticed her parents' intention to give her a playmate. One day she suddenly ran up to Ethan, her little face serious, and asked, "Daddy, do you want a little brother?" Ethan picked her up onto his lap and asked softly, "So does Nora want one?" Nora tilted her little head and thought for a moment, saying, "I want one. But Daddy, can you please not only love the little brother and stop loving me?" The little girl looked a bit worried. Ethan's heart melted instantly, holding his daughter. He said with aching tenderness, "Silly girl, Daddy will always love you the most. Even if there's a little brother or sister, you will still be Daddy's first baby, Daddy's whole world." Nora finally relaxed into a smile, wrapping her arms around his neck and acting coquettishly. "Then Daddy will make me a strawberry cake." "All right, Daddy will make it for you." Ethan agreed without hesitation, scooping up his daughter and heading for the kitchen. He completely forgot that he had just been so adamant about trying to make a baby. I leaned against the kitchen doorway, watching the man in an apron expertly whipping cream and the little girl beside him standing on tiptoe, eyes wide and expectant, and I couldn't help but laugh. Sunlight poured in, and the air was filled with the sweet, cloying scent of cream and the feeling of happiness. This was the life I had once longed for but could never reach. Plain, mundane, yet warm enough to bring one to tears. A year later, our second child was born. A boy, we named him Noah, wishing him a life of peace and smooth sailing. As Ethan had promised, he was there from start to finish, fully involved. He attended every prenatal checkup without fail. During my morning sickness he was more anxious than I was, and when the baby kicked he was more excited than I was. When I went into the delivery room he insisted on being by my side, gripping my hand tightly, wiping my sweat, cheering me on, though I could see he had more sweat on his brow than I did, and his complexion was paler than mine. When the child was born, his eyes were red, he kissed me first, choked up saying, "Honey, you worked hard," and only then went to see our son. During the confinement period, he hired the best postpartum nanny, but still handled many things himself, changing diapers, bathing the baby, burping him, with a touch even more practiced than the nanny's. Nora was full of curiosity about this new little brother. Every day she would touch his tiny face and chirp at him as she talked. Ethan always stayed patiently at their side, holding their son in one arm and wrapping his other arm around their daughter, explaining his parenting insights to me, the scene so tender it was almost unreal. He never had insomnia again. Even when Noah cried at night, he would wake immediately, deftly prepare the formula and feed him, his movements gentle, as if afraid of waking me and Nora. He said that listening to the steady breaths of his wife and child was the most soothing lullaby in the world. On a weekend afternoon, the sunlight was just right. Nora was building blocks in the children's room, and Noah was cooing to himself in the crib, amused. I curled up on the sofa reading a script. I had taken up my screenwriting work again, while Ethan busied himself in the kitchen. The air smelled richly of cake. Suddenly I remembered those words I spoke years ago, on that desperate rooftop, when I shoved Nora into his arms. I put the script down and went to the kitchen doorway. The CEO, wearing a cartoon apron, was whipping cream. His arms moved so fast they left ghosting trails, his expression so focused you would have thought he was handling precision machinery. "Ethan," I called. He stopped and looked back at me, his gaze gentle. "What's up? Hungry?" "Almost done. Nora said she wanted cake tonight. Do you want mango or strawberry?" I made a bit of both. I looked at him and, smiling, asked, "Still planning to jump?" He visibly froze for a moment, then realized what I was saying. Smiling helplessly, he set down the whisk, walked over with cream still on his hands, and pulled me into his arms. He nuzzled my nose, his tone indulgent and sure. "Jump? I have to stay alive to make cakes for you and the kids for the rest of my life." After saying that, he bent down and kissed me. Between his lips and teeth was the cloying scent of cream. And the taste of happiness. It was indeed very sweet. Super, insanely sweet.